I guess the big story in the sports world today, Montreal Canadiens legend Jean Béliveau passing away at the age of 83. One of the all-time greats in the sport of hockey. Bill, what was your reaction when you heard that Jean Béliveau had passed away?
Well, I had been aware that he had been ill, and so I knew Pat Quinn had been ill, but I didn't know that Pat's death was as imminent as it became. In the case of Jean, I knew that he'd been very sick, so I was not expecting the worst, but I was expecting a celebration of his life and his career, and that's what happened. And Jean Béliveau came into my life probably in the mid-'70s when I was working with Alan Eagleson. I was involved as business manager of Team Canada in the Canada Cup, and Jean was always at the Forum on game day or in the Molson room that the Canadiens had. It was such a wonderful building, the Forum, and he was always so friendly. He was just, there was nothing standoffish about him. There was nothing egocentric about him. He had a nice middle of the road way, and when I was with the Leafs, I think around 2002, maybe 2003, was the first time his illness, whatever it turned out to be, but it started to catch up with him, and that would have been in his early 70s, obviously. And I called him because, in addition to my exposure with him at the Canada Cup, I had also had he and his wife, Lise, I believe her name is Lise, I have to check on that, one of the boys can check it, but they had come to Jamaica for Bobby Orr and the Hockey Legends, which was one of the top television shows in the history of sport, and I was the executive producer. I thought I'd throw that in. Anyway, I got to know Jean just that much better. So when he was sick, I gave him a call, and his line was not attached directly to him, so I left a message as directed. And then about 3 days later, Ken Dryden, who was the president of the Leafs at the time, came in and said, "Bill, how do you know Jean Béliveau?" And I said, I explained to him. He said, "Well, I was talking to him because I wanted to find out how he was." And he said, "Oh, Ken," he said, "make sure you thank Billy for calling me. I really appreciate that young man." So I go, "Ooh, that's nice," because, Jean Béliveau didn't have to say that. He could have shortened that one down quite nicely. And so I got to having a feeling about him that happened quite spontaneously, and yet both of us were impressed with each other. He had far more to impress with than I. I just tried to be a good guy, and of course I realized what a great player he was, what a great person he was, so I had lots of time to spin yarns with him.
Today there was a story in the Toronto Star, Ken Dryden, as the author, not the former hockey player, writing about his experiences with Jean Béliveau and the fact that in his rookie year, he was roomed with Jean Béliveau. And this incredible, as it would turn out, that would be his last year of Jean Béliveau's career. So just this incredible kind of happenstance between the future of the Canadiens and, or one of the future superstars of the Canadiens and one of the all-time leading greats of the Canadiens. I was kind of impressed, maybe even taken aback by how much the Toronto media has written about Jean Béliveau. And I dare say that says a lot about the impact of this man. And just, again, every single article keeps coming back to that word class, because he was the embodiment, the personification of class. I don't know.
On and off the ice, and he played with class on the ice. There were no tricks. There was just this big 6'3", 6'4" guy skating out there as gracefully as a figure skater and handling the puck with deft skill and leading a team that was probably one of the best ever, scoring key goals and doing his job without getting away from the rules of the game. And like as you mentioned, class, there is a hockey dictionary, and if we could get it and looked up class, I dare say that Jean Béliveau would have the whole page. That's how he stood out to me. I mean, he was a handsome, elegantly dressed, elegantly spoken man, and I don't know of anyone that ever had a bad word to say about him.
Did you know, and again, just one of the articles I read today, that he built up a number of penalty minutes earlier in his career because he was getting pushed around. And when basically he established himself as a player who could handle himself on the ice, they backed off. So this regal, gentlemanly-like, noble player, this guy who just carried himself with the ultimate class, early in his career was basically one of these players who had to stand up to protect his ground. And again, Phil talked about it the other day, what it was like playing with Gordie Howe. And I don't know whether it was six seconds into his first shift or his first game, there's Gordie Howe laying an elbow on him, right, to find out what he's like. So it's just...
See if his tooth or if his lip would split. And it did.
Yeah. So, I mean, I also find it incredible, too, that Jean Béliveau kind of retired before the Summit Series. So we looked upon all these great players, and there was one of the greatest of all times who wasn't in the series because his career had just ended before what was to become one of the seminal moments in the history of hockey.
Yeah, and he was, I think he wanted to set his own timetable. He's always been a man of that kind of mettle. And, you know, one of the great hockey stories that I was talking last night on an AM radio station in Toronto, 1050, and telling them the story of Punch Imlach told. In 1957, the Leafs made the playoffs by coming back from behind the fourth place, I believe it was the Rangers, but notwithstanding, it was the Rangers. And they were 10 points back with 6 games to go. So they kept beating people, and they were kind of the miracle Leafs. Now they come down to the last 2. They have to win the last 2 games, and the Rangers have to lose one in New York on Sunday, and they're playing Montreal. And Imlach claimed, and I have no reason not to believe him, he said, I knew I had it in the bag because my boys were going to win. When I called my pal in New York Sunday at noon and say, Jean, I need a favor. I need a win. And I mean, it wasn't that short or that terse. But to this day, at least 2 people, and probably more, know that that happened. And Béliveau, I think, got 2 that afternoon as the Rangers were beaten by the Canadiens. And that night in Detroit, Larry Regan got a pair, and I think the Leafs won 5-3 coming from behind, and went into the playoffs against Boston and beat them in 7 games, thanks to a Western Canadian guy named Jerry Eamon, who was a right winger, scored a lot of goals in that series. But the key to all of that, from a storytelling standpoint, is that Imlach did, and he did because he had a wonderful relationship with Jean Béliveau. He was the guy that kept him with the Ace, as they call them, the Aces in Quebec, and he was eligible and ready to go from the junior Citadels to pro hockey with the Canadiens, and Imlach convinced him to stay with the Ace, and he played there for, I think, 1 year of his pro eligibility, and then Montreal got the checkbook out, and Béliveau came to Montreal, and the rest is history. But when you look at it from a Toronto standpoint, one of the great hockey people and hockey personalities in Toronto has to be Punch Imlach. And one of the greats in Montreal certainly is Jean Béliveau. So I'm not surprised that a lot of people in Toronto are writing stories about Béliveau because it connects the whole act with the Leafs when they were most prosperous.